Validating claims is important these days. Whether we're writing a LinkedIn post or an article, we're exposed to so much misinformation that it's important that whatever we post is accurate. And for a really long time now, I've been trying to be that guy who's super organized with my research. If I read something interesting or come across an interesting fact, log it into my second brain. But in reality, I'm not prepared to face or come across an insight in my day-to-day life. I don't know about you, but that's not how I work. I only come to realize the importance of something and the importance that this is an insight only at the point at which I've had a chance to think about this thing that I've heard, and when it comes to writing an article or a post, in which case it becomes important for me to go, okay, where did that come from? And in that instance, what I do is I write the rough draft article, post, whatever, and then I would go through the process of searching for that claim. And here's what that looks like in practice. After I've written this rough draft, I would go through and I would analyze the text and extract all of the claims that are made within that text. With that text, if there are any numbers, I would go and check that those numbers are first of all accurate. And then I'd check the overall accuracy of the claim. Have I misconstrued a claim, or is it just outright false? And then after that, I document the claim. And in terms of documenting, it looks something like this, where I'd have the claim, the source, the publish date, the link to read more about it, and then ignore this validated column for now. But this is kind of like how I would document it. And now this is a time-consuming process, but it's also an automatable process, which brings me to this n8n workflow. By the way, you've got this to download if it's useful to you. More on that in a second. So this n8n workflow, what it does is it extracts all the claims from the text and then validates whether or not the claim has been validated or invalidated, and then updates this text and just updates this column. So it creates a new row for each claim with the source, with the publish date. So all of this is automated. And then it just has a column here to say whether or not it's been validated or invalidated. Now, just because from this perspective it says false doesn't mean the claim is invalid. It just means the automation has not been able to validate it. So the automation itself errs on the side of caution. So these are very high probability truths. It just needs a human to corroborate. So back to this n8n workflow then. This looks on the surface as super complicated, especially when you see all of those other sections. But really, we just need to focus on the top section. And how we've broken this down is that each one of these sections where you see the blue sphere, those are HTTP requests that call these different sections or these mini workflows. And these mini workflows do something really specific. They're like a function that accepts, in this instance, article content and then returns something. For instance, a list of claims to validate. This limit is only there for debugging purposes. When you're doing this in production, you can remove the limit. It just makes it faster to work with when you're debugging with fewer rather than more sort of claims. So the reason why these have been separated out like this is, one, to make this workflow much simpler, and two, I want to eventually turn these into API endpoints. And so then when I've got these in code, I have much more flexibility to optimize these mini workflows much better and add more determinism into it, add more code-based checks rather than AI-based checks into the workflows. Now, like I said, you have this process to download and use this workflow however you want. There's a link to the workflow at the end of the article. But even if you don't think this is directly useful to you. I think there are some techniques worth taking away that you can then apply to a much wider range of workflows. Either way, I hope this article and video provides a useful breakdown of this specific workflow and also the techniques used. Now, if you are downloading this and using this workflow directly, there are a few things that you need to do. You need to go through each one of those blue spheres, those HTTP requests, and you can see here that it's posting to n8n.iqbala.com. What you want to do is these are name matched with each section. So extract claims here. Need to open up the webhook, go to production URL, copy that production URL, and then update the URL here. So you need to do that for each one of these. So search for claim relates to search for claim here. And after you've done that, you want to make sure that your entire workflow is active, because otherwise these webhooks won't work, because we're using the production URLs for the webhooks. So make sure it's active, and then you'll be able to work with this. Have the limit verified that you've got everything set up correctly, and then take the limit off after that. It's just a much quicker way to work. The other thing you need to do is it uses two external resources. One which is Exa, and this is just a web search tool optimized for agents. So really good, very cheap. I'm using the freebie tier, so I'm going to need to work around some of the rate limits. This is why some of these loops exist, by the way, is because I'm working with the cheap or free tier. Therefore, I've got rate limits in place, and it doesn't really add anything in terms of time much, but it's something to bear in mind. Sign in, get the API key. Same again. What Browserless does is it scrapes pages and returns nicely marked up markdown. So it does a lot of the grunt work for you. Get the API key. I'm just using the free service. That's why I'm rate limiting things in the workflow. Okay, so now let's go for a tour of this workflow then. And I'll start from the trigger. I've got a webhook for the trigger, but really you could use anything. We just need to feed in the article into the workflow. And the first step is to extract the claims. And this goes to this section where it makes an LLM call to using a small model. I'm using Gemma 4 throughout. It's a small model, and also it means that I can later just load it, use it locally, and is perfectly decent for this task. This goes through two steps in terms of extracting the list of claims from the text. So text goes in, list of claims come out. This additional check is called a self-reflection check. And what that does is it just basically takes the output from this and it just checks whether or not it's done everything correctly. So this is much more of a validation task, and then it just cleans up the text and just makes sure that everything that's been done here in the first step is accurate. And what's been found is when you do these self-reflection checks, you get a higher degree of accuracy with the output. And then finally, it just splits the text out and then feeds those claims out. So what we have going through the rest of this workflow is a list of claims. So the rest of the workflow will operate per claim basis. This loop is only there for Exa to avoid the rate limit. So at the moment, they set the rate limit to 10 per second, which is why there's a wait of a second. So it goes over batches of 10. With each claim, this workflow searches for the claim using Exa and returns a list of, in this case, 7 results of claims. These then go in so what comes out of this is each claim with relevant search results for the claim. So when it goes into the claim check takes in the claim and the search results text, and then it just goes through a validation process here. whereby the first one is it checks whether the claim mentions any numbers and just validates, if using regex, whether that number exists within the search results text. If it doesn't, then this fails the claim accuracy check and the spreadsheet gets updated with a false. So now if the numbers do exist and they have been validated, it goes through to this next check, which basically checks the accuracy of the search results text to the claim. Is the claim accurately reflected, or an accurate reflection of the search result text? And this is the same prompt done 3 times. You can use 3 different models. And the reason why I'm using this 3 times is to iron out inconsistencies that could cause perhaps the AI to mistakenly validate a false claim or invalidate a true one. And then here, if 2 out of 3 agree on an outcome, then that's the result that goes through, comes out of the accuracy check. And again, if that fails, it gets added to the spreadsheet. If it succeeds, then it goes through extract source, which just basically, again, does a self-reflection check here as well. But it basically takes the text, takes the search text, and identifies any sort of source, and sees if there's a source mentioned. And then that source is returned along with each claim. And then each claim goes through another validation step. So this is the final validation step along with the source. And what this step does is, first of all, it would search the source and the claim. So here you can see the source and the claim as a search. When it comes back with the results, I've got a list of trusted domains. This could come from a spreadsheet. I recommend you to, maybe have your own list of trusted domains and sources that you know and that you trust. And then if the results exist within the trusted domains, those float to the top. So this just makes sure that the trusted sources float to the top. And this browserless step would take the most trusted source and it would scrape that page for the content. And then this text garbled check just checks whether or not the text is readable, because we're going to be scraping PDFs sometimes and the PDF is not readable. So in this instance, if the text is not readable, it returns false, meaning we need to do some work. But if the text is readable, it goes through another claim check here. So claim accuracy check. So it goes through the same accuracy check. And then after that, the result is this. Basically, it'll create a new row with the claim, the source, the published date, the links, and the validated true. Now, I'll admit, this workflow is far from perfect. I would say it's still work in progress. But the goal was never to show this specific workflow, but is rather to share some of the techniques behind the workflow itself. I've added multiple validation steps here, but I would want to add more, which is why the next step for me is to turn each one of those sections into API endpoints and have more checks like semantic similarity checks to make sure that the text is accurately reflective of the claims. If you want to download and use this workflow, please go ahead. But I invite you to make it your own. So add new nodes, remove stuff that you don't need, implement based on the workflow that you use, but never forget to test what you put in. So make sure you're using those limits to test and make sure it works correctly, and then just remove that limit, and always work with small models as well. Well, hope you found this useful, and thank you, and join me again next time.